Hi class, this will be our last live lecture as next week is week 8 and you guys will be wrapping up with your capstones. Just a friendly reminder, the capstones will be due day 4 of week 8. It's not all the way till Sunday because I have to grade them all and be able to submit grades. We are doing really well. We're almost done. I have a couple people had some questions about the quiz. I will be getting back to you as soon as possible to answer those questions. Today we're going to be talking about evidence-based group treatment for couples and family therapy. Group will be a class that you will take. I might be teaching it for you as I have taught it many times for CBU. And the beauty of groups is it offers an opportunity for people to experience counseling in a way that will, in a sense, allow them to gain perspective from others, experience people maybe going through similar situations. Group helps people to not feel alone. And there's opportunities for people to learn something, maybe from other group members, and the clinician is leading the group, of course, and facilitating, is taking charge, of course, but there's something very cathartic that can happen in group. And I think it's that whole idea of like, we're in this together. We're not alone. Other people experience this too. And then also seeing how people have succeeded and or failed in situations. And so that gives insight on maybe what somebody else would do. So there are opportunities for these kinds of things, even in a couple family setting. And so we're just going to talk about that a little bit. Groups usually tend to need to be not terribly big. Now, an open group would be, for example, like an AA group, NA group. There's some special like process groups that tend to be closed, maybe 6 to 8 weeks, or maybe due to confidentiality, they don't have it open without like maybe an interview or a conversation before joining the group, just to help protect the identity of the people in the group. But this kind of group, like if there was like maybe eight adults, 4 kids, if it's something that's just training, like let's say if it's on some level of behavior training or communication, it could be a larger group, maybe because the group is not opening up like so specifically. Maybe it's more general information. And like I explained, open groups versus closed groups. Open groups, anybody can show up at any point in time. Closed groups can be due to confidentiality. It's very structured. So it's like you can't show up week 6 because you would have missed all the information before. You need to start at the beginning. And so when you're leading a group, you need to make sure you know all these things, because if you don't, then you could lead people astray. As a trainee or an associate, you'll have supervision, so that will be helpful. And depending on the kind of facilities you decide to work at, there'll probably be someone leading the group maybe with you initially. And there might be a structured format because it's maybe in an inpatient setting or things like that. That's sometimes where group is often held. But there's a lot of groups that can be offered for people just to work through like behavioral situations for parents. There could be teen groups that talk about, technology or other struggles that teens can be going through. Maybe it's to deal with a family member who's an alcoholic, all those kinds of things. So, group, like I said, is a great thing, but you need to make sure you know what you're doing before you start leading. Group, the cool thing is confidentiality still applies, obviously being respectful. What are the commitments? This is the thing with confidentiality. Group members will sign something saying that they're going to keep things confidential, but what's tricky is we don't have control over people once they go home. So if someone breaches confidentiality and somehow that gets around to others, that could result in someone being kicked out of the group. What I would suggest, in under like explaining this to group members is, look, like if you want your business to be kept to you, like just for you and whoever's here, like please be respectful of that for other people. That will help people kind of have a little bit of perspective. I think also just letting group members know that like we want this to be a safe environment where people can be vulnerable, and we're only going to get the most out of group based on what we put into it. And so if we're going to put it all in, we want to make sure we're being respectful of that so that we can get the most out of this experience, right? that's like important to reiterate from the beginning. There's usually rules or structure to the group that has to be gone over. And if it's an open-ended group, that might be something you go over each week. If it's a closed-ended group, that might be something that you go over at the beginning and then might have to bring up as things come up. Okay. So why is psychoeducation important potentially for families? It could be helpful with understanding schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and any sort of childhood mood disorders. There's autism groups for parents. There's ADHD groups for parents, sometimes for even kids. And better understanding of like some of these more chronic mental illnesses, some of these genetic ones. It is huge because it's really hard. And I think having family support, like of other families experience the same thing, like that goes back to that you're not alone factor. We can do this together. Those kinds of things. I think that really helps people to grow into like really hear how the information is potentially helping someone else or not helping someone, navigating that. But again, like these are the things that would be benefited from a group situation. Partner abuse. So, oftentimes could be split up by gender, like, male, female groups. Domestic violence groups could be done together. Sometimes they're done separately. Maybe a group for people who have been perpetrators and a group for the victims. And obviously, domestic violence can happen in any kind of relationship, but there are groups for that. As we know, there are groups for addiction, which is there's all kinds of addiction, right? There's alcoholism, drug addiction, there is sex addiction. There's groups for over like bad relationships with food, all kinds of different things, right? Codependency. You have more faith-based kind of groups, like Celebrate Recovery, where a couple could split and be in a gender-based group, and then they meet together maybe for worship or things like that. So there's a lot of different options out there. That's why it's so important as you are growing as a therapist and are learning so much that you know the resources and tools that are available to you, because there's so many, which is awesome, right? There's so many, but that way you can refer clients to different situations, which is great, to help them like get the most help that they can. Someone could be in a group and also have individual psychotherapy, which is also a benefit too. So, going over, like, again, going back to DV or domestic group, you're going to talk about like maybe the cycle of abuse so people can be more aware. Knowledge is power. I firmly believe that. And so, for people who have been in an abusive cycle or have even grown up in a household of an abusive cycle and then are repeating maybe a generational curse by being in the same situation themselves, this is where we can start talking about like these generational curses and like understanding, well, this is the cycle, this is the pattern. We have to change the pattern if we want to change the situation, right? And for them to have better understanding and knowledge, so maybe they can avoid certain situations or whatever. So as far as like, what does that look like if it was the therapy was to be done with both partners? So maybe they're considering the treatment of domestic violence and how it's worked before. Maybe it's a mild case without any other additional pathology. And this is a place for people to talk and be open about what's going on in the relationship with other couples. Again, the therapist would have to screen carefully, probably the couple. Maybe the violence got to a point where they're scared of what could happen next, and so they're trying to kind of be preventative. Like maybe there hasn't been hitting, but maybe there's been throwing of things or whatever. It's trying to make sure the right people are in the group. So this probably would be, I would think, a closed group, because you want to make sure the right people are in the group. And the goal obviously being we're trying to decrease violence and everyone's responsible for their own violence, and we want to give them skills and coping skills to reduce violence. This is an example of a group for couples. There's multi-couple groups, with preventative interventions, wanting to improve the quality of the relationship. A lot of times Kaiser clients, when they come in for couples therapy, Kaiser will want to maybe assign them to a group before they do individual couples therapy. And this could be maybe psychoeducation, maybe a video, something for them to practice or discuss. So things we're going to look for are risk factors. We're going to make sure that we are educating couples on aggression. We want to make sure that we're setting ground rules for things like that, like what we're hoping for the group and what we're trying to maintain for the group, as far as if this was a DV group, like what should be happening in the home, what should not be. We're going to want to make sure, if we're doing a group for couples, that it's matching the need of the couple and that they're an appropriate fit for whatever the group is, because that doesn't make sense for people if it's not the appropriate fit. And then we want to make sure that whatever the research is or evidence is in the group, for it to be effective, that's clear. Maybe that there's set goals, and maybe that the group members know like what they should be able to gain from it, so that they have a way to scale or to see like if they're getting out of the group what they should be getting, and if they're not, let's look and evaluate that as well. Okay. So CBT, we talked about that last time a little bit. So, a lot of different things. ADHD could be talked through with that. Some sort of mood disorders could be dealt with that. We have on here ODD. I think thoughts, behaviors, beliefs, we're trying to modify behavior. So that's where, you can see how that could be helpful for parents. PCIT is parent involvement. I think I'm saying that right. I'm going to forget the others, the C and the T, but PCIT is a mode of therapy where the parents are involved, the therapist is involved, and the children are involved. And the therapist is coaching the parents, usually through some sort of hearing device, that a little microphone or a little hearing thing goes into their ear, and the therapist can communicate. So the therapist isn't necessarily directly in front of them. Oh, I'm sorry. It's positive child intensive training, I think, something like that. Great modality to help with behavior with kids and for parents to learn how to be with their children. That might sound very strange to you, but depending on how a person's raised, they really may not know how to interact with their kids. And so, hey, you may not know that. That might be a hard thing to admit to yourself, but like what you're doing different is you're going and getting help. That's really cool. That's really important. That's life-changing. That's generational curse changing. That's where you're going to have different outcomes. Like, yeah, a parent could feel ashamed, like I'm so ashamed I don't know how to do this. But you know what? You know what's different about you than maybe your parents is you are willing to get the help. Okay. And that's pretty impressive. That's a blessing. That's a good thing. And so, having parents that can do those kinds of things with their kids, it's really important, and it can be a huge game changer, not only for that child, but any other children that they have. So there's those kinds of things that parents can do. And, again, groups with kids and them relating to other kids who are struggling in similar ways with, like, let's say attention deficit or ODD or things of that nature, where they're learning like coping strategies, techniques. You could have parent involvement like midway through the group, or the parents are in their own group and then doing a combined group. Great way to work through the challenges that they're facing and get the outcomes that they want. Very, very powerful. Group therapy with couples and families is gaining increasing recognition. Okay, so like we mentioned, schizophrenia, bipolar, domestic violence, ADHD, and ODD. There's, again, all the psychoeducational groups. There's groups for parents, like I said, with spectrum disorder type things. There's groups for kids. I know like Easter Seals has a group with kids that are on the spectrum, just to help with social skills. You see a lot of times in schools, there's social skills groups. Anger management groups for children and adults, right? There's those different kinds of things. And the nice thing, again, about a psychoeducational group is like you're learning techniques, you're learning why we do what we do, which I think, again, that goes back to that knowledge is power. If I understand why I do it, maybe I can figure out the why and then not have the outcome, right? Those are the things we're sorting through. So I just hope that you'll see this as a great way to integrate maybe into your future practice, whether that's your own practice that you have or you're working with other people. But this is a great way to help a lot of people all at once, who are struggling together, and hopefully like through leaning on one another, and it takes a village kind of concept, you get an outcome that is really great, maybe even a little faster, or a nice addition to therapy that can maybe speed up the process so that families can start seeing change and being able to live in that change. So okay, guys, I hope you have a great week. Hang in there, almost done. And if you need anything, just go ahead and email me.